Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to call this meeting to order, Committee of the Whole. And as is our custom, I'll start with a land acknowledgement. We're pleased to be here today on the traditional territory of Treaty 6 and the Métis homeland. We acknowledge all those who share a deep connection with this land. The City of Beaumont respects the histories, languages, and cultures of all of Canada's First Peoples, whether they be of First Nation, Métis, or Inuit descent, and appreciates that their presence continues to enrich Canada's vibrant communities. We are all treaty people. The peace treaties bind us all. We will start today with the adoption of the agenda. First item. Madam Clerk, are there any modifications from the administration?
Yes, we do have one attachment to be added to item 4.8. That's the land use bylaw, our zoning blueprint. It would be attachment 11 Beaumont density targets. That'll be displayed when the item is presented, and then the agenda will be updated post-meeting, provided that Committee of the Whole is willing to add that item.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bajaya. Then I would look for a committee member to move the agenda as amended. Mayor Danluck.
So move, Madam Chair, at 5:01 p.m.
Thank you very much. And would the members of the committee please vote? That passes unanimously. I'm looking for the number 6 and I'm seeing number 5. So total signed in 6. Okay, that's unanimous. That just the numbers on my machine are showing that it's, I know Councillor Miller is not here today, so it would be 7, but I'm seeing 5 yes votes. I'm wondering why. Yeah, I think it's just the machine that's doing something different. Okay, thank you very much. Then moving on to the next item on our agenda is the adoption of the minutes. The Committee of the Whole, November 15th, 2022. Is there a member of the committee willing to move those minutes be accepted as presented? Mayor Danluck.
So move, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Members of the committee, if there are no questions, please vote. And I will declare the vote, and that passes unanimously as well. Okay, joke. Then we're on to the very first item, and that is the land use bylaw, our zoning blueprint report. So, Ms. Raymond, are you presenting or no? Okay, thank you very much. And I will make sure you can speak into the mic. It's on now. There you go.
Thank you very much. Good evening, members of council. Last month, administration and the contracted consultant Intelligent Futures presented the findings from the land use bylaw report, responding to a motion from council. The motion and the subsequent report outlined 3 major components. The first was to assess the feasibility and impacts of increasing parking requirements for businesses and additional dwelling units in residential districts. The second was to assess the feasibility and impacts of limiting the number of dwelling units per parcel to a maximum of 2 for single-family dwellings with an attached garage and 3 for single-family dwellings with a detached garage. And finally, an overview of current home-based business standards. The analysis included policy research, review of case studies, and a community engagement process that involved 518 participants, ranging from an online survey, small group workshops, and one-on-one interviews. The findings of this analysis are summarized in the report written by administration, as well as in attachment 1, land use bylaw engagement, what we learned report. As part of the review of feasibility and impacts, administration provided a list of tools beyond the land use bylaw that can support addressing some of the concerns raised by residents, namely enforcement through the traffic safety bylaw, continuing to improve community design to balance parking supply with developing a walkable and compact city, regulating discretionary uses to ensure there is not an overwhelming concentration of uses that strain parking infrastructure, continued investment in local and regional transit, and communication campaigns to inform residents about parking choices. So as a brief overview of what was presented and discussed at the November 15th Committee of the Whole meeting, I'll pass it on to Sean Hipkiss, the Manager of Development Services, to introduce the 3 new attachments that were added to the agenda package to support the committee's discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sharp. There you go.
Good evening.
Hi.
So we have 3 attachments that we've presented here. Key considerations and administration comments, which essentially covers off the questions in and around demographics, affordability, what goes into the public study or parking studies, sorry, assessments, and the benefits with increased density. The next attachment we have is the regional comparison of parking regulations. And then the thirdly we have is the percentage of low density development permits that are included in ADUs. 6 to 11% roughly in that area is per year for permitting is in ADUs, as a kind of a rough summary.
That's it. So those were the last 3 that you were talking about, the attachments 8, 9, and 10?
That's correct.
Those are the 3 that you were talking about. And is there a number 11?
Oh, sorry. And for number 11, I don't know if we have it presented here.
Do we have it, Mr. Jack? Oh, okay, so it'll be on the screen in a minute. Would you like to speak to it?
Yeah. So this is roughly, or this is a new neighborhoods planned density targets. We're in and around that 35 dwelling units per net residential hectare, comparatively to other locations, Edmonton, Leduc, St. Albert, and Devon. Before that, you had your capital region growth, which was the plan or targeted densities up until the year 2017. This had a range, but only a maximum that you could go. So in that case there, if you see the highlighted areas for Beaumont is from 25 to 35, and you couldn't go past the 35. In this case here, you can go past that now in the new target density targets.
We can go past, is what you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay,
And these are planned density targets. So
thank you. Thanks
betcha.
for bringing that forward. Okay, so there's nothing else from the administration. I will ask if the members of the committee have any questions, comments to make. Councillor Tessier.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks. Can you bring that chart up again, maybe, please?
Number 11, the same one.
Yeah, just that last one there. So can we talk about, let's talk about these density targets a little bit more. So are these targets, or are they, you have to meet a minimum? And this is the first time I'm seeing that we only have to meet a minimum of 25. So can you just talk about this chart a little bit more in depth?
Oh, I'm sorry. I got carried away with reading my notes. Sorry.
Not a problem. Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to Councillor Tessier, what you see in front of you are the EMRB one is our current density targets. And then the one that would be on that far right column there that says CRB, that was the old density targets underneath the old growth plan. And they were actually for a much broader area. They weren't just for the city of Beaumont. It actually encapsulated parts of Edmonton as well as Leduc County within these targets. So they are for greenfield, so new planned areas is where these are applied. And that 35 dwelling units is our current target for greenfield development. So as a planned density in our area structure plans, that's where we're looking at all the different land uses that they're providing, how that will add up to that 35 dwelling units. Once you've removed commercial and you've removed the roads and that sort of thing, that's how you get to the net residential hectare. So they've got that in the greenfield. And then previously we were under that 25 to 35. It was a little bit higher than other areas like Leduc, that sort of thing, because it did incorporate Edmonton a little bit. So Edmonton's always had higher density targets than everybody else in the region, just recognizing their role as the major center within the region. So I think in some ways, can you just rephrase your question just a little bit for me there?
Yep, pretty much. What if we were not to make the target? So say we hit only 20 units per hectare.
Yeah, so they're planned targets. So they are not aspirational. We review them at every subdivision stage that's submitted to see where they're actually at for performance for as-built density versus planned density. And then we work with the developers to say, okay, you're at this, you're going to need to bring up future stages. We know that as they start to develop the first stage of a development, they're usually lower density. They bring on more of that single detached house first, and then they kind of get dense later on. So we do work with them to meet those density targets. And then older areas of Beaumont, which would be our pre-annexation area boundaries, they're the ones that would be within that CRB density target, or they have density targets within their area structure plans, their outline plans, and they're allowed to continue to meet those. So they would be a little bit less, but we do work with people to try to achieve this 35 dwelling units per net residential hectare. And then we're reporting on that to the board. So that is something that we weren't able to bring today, but that was a report that we will be bringing forward to council with the as-built densities as where we're at for actual performance.
Okay, thank you for that. So I just kind of want to hear a clear answer. Like say we were not to meet it, what would happen? What are there consequences? Or again, is this just something like we could totally change if we wanted to?
So we are legislated underneath the Municipal Government Act as a member of a growth management board to follow what is set out within that growth management board. One of those things is that they're required to provide a growth plan. We are required to abide by that growth plan. Other municipalities within that growth management board could take us through, and Mr. Wong is on the phone. It's not on the phone. He's virtually here, but he could answer a little bit more maybe how that might work through the ref process. But we could end up going through the appeal process. We might not get an area structure plan approved. We may have them. There are different options that they can take through the Municipal Government Act to actually bring action against us for not following that. If we chose to blatantly say, okay, we're only going to hit 20, we probably wouldn't get that area structure plan approved because all new area structure plans have to go through the board and all approvals. So if we said we were going to do one thing over here and we blatantly turned around and did something else, we would probably have future problems working through the board as well. So there would be other ramifications, even if they weren't overt. We would have consequences.
Councillor Tessier, could Mayor Danila get a question in here? Would you mind?
No worries, go ahead.
Mayor,
Thank you.
it's not going on. Okay. Could you put yours off, Councillor Tessier, and I'll put you back on later? There we go. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Tessier. My question is on the slide that you're currently on. So if I may ask the question from administration, my understanding is that the EMRB guidelines of 35 net residential hectares, residents per hectare is mandated by the EMRB. Do you have any idea why Devon is at 30 instead of being 35? You may not know the answer to that, but I'm curious why Devon would be mandated to have 35 under the guidelines and the rest of us in this area are at 35 hectares, which is a substantial difference. Any idea why that is? If you don't know, that's fine, but I thought in case you do know, I'd like to know why myself.
Through the chair to to Mayor Danila, no, I don't have that answer, but why Devon is at 30. I'm not sure if Joannis knows why Devon is a little bit less. I can speculate due to their size and their growth. They really don't have that same rate of growth that the other municipalities have. They've got more oil constraints in terms of they've got a lot of oil pumps and stuff like that that's actually constraining Devon's future growth area. So I could see that as some of the challenges, but the rest of that might be
Do we want to ask
speculation.
Mr. Wong? I don't know if he can hear us.
Sure.
There he is. Okay, Johannes.
Hi. I don't know the exact reason why Devon got the 30, but we got the 35 at the time. But it was like when the at the time when Capital Region Board was still in place, they were reviewing and updating their Capital Region Growth Plan at around 2015-16, and there was a process for that. And during that process, each municipalities would contribute or to work with the board as to their density targets, and that is where it is. And I think it is also through a negotiated process. At the end of the day, the Capital Region Board, because of the MGA review, they transform into the Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Board. So, and that is why it's also renamed the Capital Region Board Growth Plans to Edmonton Metropolitan Regional Growth Plan. So, but the density targets remain the same. And what we saw on the screen was a result from that working group and the at the time the plan update. So we have to go back to the history and all the minutes of those working groups to see why Devon got 30, while most of the municipalities got 35.
Mayor Daniluk, would you like to respond to that?
That's fine for this evening. Thank you. I'm just curious if there's a specific reason, but it's not that critical, this part of our discussion. Thank you, Councillor Tessier, for letting me jump in on the slide you were on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Councillor Tessier.
No worries, Mayor. Thank you, Chair. So I just really want to understand this clearly. So if a developer came in, they want to build Four Seasons estates. They would not be able to build Four Seasons estates again.
That's correct. They would not be able to build Four Seasons as only Four Seasons. If Four Seasons were part of a much larger area where you could balance out that density, then yes, something like Four Seasons could be that estate kind of lots, that development. But in its own confines, no, we couldn't say go and develop a new Four Seasons as just its own separate neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Moncrief-Swain.
Yeah, thanks. I wonder if you could just provide a bit of background around at the EMRB. So when we put in these area structure plans in, who's there evaluating it? What role does Beaumont play? So if Devon comes in, right, do we go through and scrutinize and like, oh, they better get 30 type thing? Do we go and what's our role there? Maybe just a bit of history, brief history. You know, we've had our MVP go in and wasn't always approved by everyone, and that's a whole different thing. But maybe just explain that process for us here.
Yeah, so through the chair to Councillor Moncrief-Swain, when we put through an area structure plan, it goes through something called the REF process, which is the Regional Evaluation Framework process. It then gets evaluated by EMRB administration as well as a third-party reviewer. They make a recommendation for the board to either approve or deny a REF application. When they have made that recommendation, say it was to approve, it then goes out to all the 13 municipalities. We all have an opportunity to review it and lodge an appeal if we feel that it's against the growth plan, or maybe there's some other issue with it. Maybe they were planning a bunch of industrial development right up against our boundary, and we're going to get a new refinery or something, and we were against it. That's not going to happen, but that's my hypothetical. If we had that happen, then we would have that opportunity to appeal, or somebody else would say, no, this isn't a great idea. Maybe we should also be looking at that. So a recent example might be the Villeneuve Airport that was just happening with Sturgeon County. There was an application that went through. They were trying to put in an area structure plan for the Villeneuve Airport area. It went through the REF process. It had more regional I guess, significance, which is what you're looking for when you review the REF application. So we don't, as Beaumont, we shouldn't really care what happens in St. Albert for the most part, unless it would be regionally significant, right? Because we're all in this, the 13 municipalities. So when Villeneuve came forward, there was that application to amend that, and we had an opportunity to say, you know, I'm not sure for the region if maybe this is the best place for Beaumont. If we had felt that way, we could have put through the appeal. So that does happen with other municipalities where some of their area structure plans have been appealed, say maybe by Edmonton, or there's been challenges with that. So we do make sure that we are working with our regional neighbors. There's a whole process. Now there is an appeal process that didn't exist before when you don't agree with the outcome that the board has decided, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of different mechanisms, but essentially it goes through a ref process, appeal or deny, and then we would finally pass that bylaw if they had approved it.
Just a follow-up. Yeah, thank you. Great explanation. Pretty clear that we can't just make up the rules. These area structure plans would not get approved, and therefore we would not be able to develop our land. So that's really appreciative around new areas. Existing areas, though, so there's ability for us to change within some neighborhoods that have already got area structure plans approved, right? And so if this council was looking at making changes for whatever reason that would impact density, how does that weigh into it? So if the area structure plan is already approved, it doesn't necessarily need to go back to the EMRB. So if we're just looking at a small neighborhood, or I forget the next level of your lovely triangle that I used to have memorized, but that next level down around that more specific plan, if we were to change, how does that impact? How does that impact our ability to be able to develop that land?
I can take this one, Councillor Consway. For a plan amendment, for example, let's give an example. Lakeville area structure plan.
Yep.
For now, it is targeted 35 residential units per net hectare. So, but if they are coming in to make a plan amendments to let's say reduce it to 32, at the end of the day, we'll then first of all we would let the developer knows that it is not meeting the EMRB minimum density targets of 35, and if they insist that we do it, then we will process the application. At the end of the day, a plan amendment will have to, in this case, we'll have to go to the Metropolitan Board for the REF process. And then they will go through the process that Ms. Kendra described, that they will, the administration review it, and a third party consultant will review it and make recommendations to EMRB, and the recommendation will reject the proposal because it doesn't meet the density targets. So we can appeal. City of Beaumont may appeal to the EMRB board and make our case. But at the end of the day, I believe that the EMRB board would reject the proponent's proposal and not approve the Lakeville amendment. So at the end of the day, we won't be having a planned Lakeville proposal. So the current state or the status quo will remain at 35. So I hope I answered you the question.
You did, and I got one more because it's on the same theme. So you did answer that extremely well. Thank you. And I think what we're trying to get to here is clearly council's heard concerns around density targets and the impact that it's having on our city, right? And so we're trying to figure out what levers we can pull here. And I hate to bring up this word because I promised myself that I wouldn't, but let's use zero lot lines just as an example, Kendra, as an example. So ASP, let's go with Elan, right? And again, we're just trying to figure out what we can and can't do here. Elan, ASP, etc. I don't know if there's what their targets are. I assume it meets, well, I know it meets 35. But if Beaumont, if this council was to say all of a sudden, we're gonna restrict the amount of condo developments or zero lot line houses that could have an impact on that ASP. Could you just explain what the potential consequences of that?
I can try, and Ms. Raymond will be chiming in for additional information, maybe. For Elon, for example, if there is a proposal to, or maybe the city wants to have a lower density for single dwelling units or the low density residential units, bigger lots or whatever. But at the end of the day, I believe there is an opportunity to still do it, is to have a little more medium density residential developments. So because the 35 density targets is the overall neighborhood targets. So for example, if we have a bigger lots, single family homes or townhomes or whatever, then if we have to compensate for that, we will have an additional for a couple more medium density residential apartment type developments. Then the overall density would remains at 35. So I think that is the option. That is a trade-off, you know. So if you want bigger lots, single family homes, then there may be requires to have a little more medium density residential.
Ms.
Perfect,
Raymond
thank you.
would like to weigh in on that as well.
Yes,
Ms. Raymond?
Through the chair to Councillor Monkoff-Swain, zero lot line is not the only way to meet density. So there is other ways that we could do that. You know, it is not, you're not actually getting that much more lots, although they'll tell you that you are in that area. So when we're looking at that, you're just taking away and then you're having more peaks, right? It's not that gentle kind of density if you want to have that, or more of, it looks very similar. And then all of a sudden you've got a high rise. Like that could be that trade-off too that we talked about last time.
Yeah.
And it's,
So what I'm hearing, the 35 is non-negotiable. How you get there is up to you.
yeah,
and-
it's just wide variety of ways to get to 35.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Monkoff-Swain. Councillor McCook? Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Wong, you had answered my question as mine was about clarifying what else we could do to hit those density targets. Therefore, if there was less of an appetite for zero lot lines, would it be that we would have to encourage developers to develop a variety of homes? Or do we just leave it completely up to them?
Through the chair to Councillor McCook, through the area structure plan process, one of the things that they do is they tell us, you know, we're going to do low density residential, and low density residential could take into account these various different forms, but ultimately this still goes back to what the land use bylaw allows for within that district. That's their ultimate rights, although they still have to abide by that plan. If the land use bylaw allowed a zero lot line, say as a permitted use within that district that they were in, we would be bound to be approving that as a zero lot line. There are different ways. So if we wanted to restrict the amount of zero lot lines, we could start to put in more clauses that would limit that, or make that, move that from a permitted use to a discretionary use, or work through different ways of that mechanism if we wanted to reduce their use within the city. So there are different ways that we could be looking at reducing that if we wanted to, if that was council's desire. That could be something that could be examined either through the subdivision process. We've got different mechanisms we've been talking about how to maybe balance zero lot lines. There's different ways of doing it that might be better for parking, that sort of thing that we've been dealing with here. For instance, in other places, you might not be able to have a front attached zero lot line product across the street from another front attached zero lot line product. Maybe you have to have a rear lane, so then you still have parking all across. So there are different ways that we can mitigate those impacts of zero lot line if that was something that was desired.
Okay, thank you. That's all for the density. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCook. Councillor Tessier, you have further questions? I think we're starting round two.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Monkoff-Swain for bringing out the zero lot line conversation. So we can get into that a little bit here. So I'm not a huge fan of them, and it's interesting to hear, Ms. Raymond, that you can't actually, you're not going to get that much further ahead on the numbers. And for me, it was reading the other cities, like I think it was Chestermere or Cochrane, one of the two, just didn't put them in because their fire service wasn't at a level that the response times were meeting them. So for a lot of those reasons, it's you know, and above and beyond what the residents are actually saying about them, it's not good either. So that's just a comment, I guess. But has there been, I guess, how long has zero lot lines kind of been around? Has there been any decent data on what on how it looks or it affects cities from a safety perspective or or how the housing, either from drainage or trees or parking?
Ms. Raymond?
Sure. So zero lot line has been around in varying different forms for, say 40 years. We have some older zero lot line that's actually from the 80s. Zero lot line in this kind of configurations probably have been around in Beaumont since about 2018. We probably started putting in, I think, zero lot line. There are different ways to mitigate the drainage issues, that sort of thing. It does come maybe with different considerations that we have to do when we're doing drawing review, that sort of thing. It's more of an education piece too, in terms of that shared easement between people. I do want to say though, that every building, regardless of if it's zero lot line or regular, has to meet a minimum building code. And the building code does change based on where that building is in relation to the lot line. So there still is that. There's enhanced regulations that go along with being this close to the lot line in terms of your fire restivity on the outside of the building, as well as maybe the amount of glazing. You can't have ventilated soffits. So there are different things that are already mitigating that risk of the buildings being closer together. So I wouldn't say that under the building code that zero lot line compared to conventional are any less safe. They're both equally safe in terms of the building code. I think, when you're building with vinyl, you're always going to have challenges regardless, right? It's a more not as resistant material, but the fire chief is here and he probably doesn't want me speaking about how we deal with fire development here in Beaumont. I'm not a fire personnel, as you're well aware, but I will leave that to the experts in the room. But that's the way that the building code interprets that. So there is already mechanisms built in for that safety of those homes closer together.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. Further?
Thank you. I can wait till actually, this one touches on density targets. I'll do one more and then I'll wait for round 3. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay, so let's look at Forest Heights. So that's probably like our newest complete subdivision is my guess, like that's actually done. So for me, it looks like a decent amount of mix from like estate to single family to duplex townhomes type of thing. So do we have the data on actually like what density target number did that particular subdivision hit?
I don't have that off the top of my head. We are, like I said, right now working through our as-built densities. Last I had heard, and this was previous to several of the stages being constructed, which were more dense, it was coming in around, I think around 22, somewhere in that neighborhood, but I'm not, we'll provide that one with the report.
Okay.
I
great.
just wanted to mention one thing though to council, and that was just the outcomes. We've got a couple of motions that we had put forward last time as some next steps, and we did alter those a little bit based on the conversation that we had heard from council last time. And we definitely heard the challenges that were being expressed with the land use bylaw. And we did want to say that our recommendations moving out of this committee of the whole would be that by April of 2023, we'd be looking for the committee of the whole to make a recommendation to council that administration undertake the following by April of 2023. And one of those is to prepare a report on options for mitigating concerns raised by the 2022 land use bylaw engagement process regarding, but not limited to, parking and noise control, including potential land use bylaw amendments. And then we also have included a proposal for a residential parking study to be considered as part of the 2023 municipal operating budget deliberations. The reason that we've moved this way over the previous recommendations we were looking for is we feel that there are different options, both maybe with the bylaw, but also administratively, as we talked about in terms of the way that we're tracking, the way that we are doing enforcement. There were some congestion issues, illegal parking, that sort of thing that aren't land use bylaw related. So that's why we thought if we could prepare the report on options for mitigating these different concerns, that if we could understand what council wants to see as us to be looking at and examining, that would be what we would bring back for council's consideration. But there are definitely things that aren't just the bylaw, but going back to the subdivision standards again, which are currently within our land use bylaw, but it's not just about the regulations. So we thought there's more to it.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond.
Thank you.
Councillor Tessier, do you have anything further right now, or we'll come back to you for the next round?
Nope. Thank you for those answers.
Okay. Councillor Van Nieuwkerk, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, no problem. Parking's written a few times up there, so maybe I'll start with that. So currently, there's a nice comparison chart there of the ADUs and the parking triggers and such. And currently the trigger in Beaumont is 75 meters squared, which is 800 square feet. And I noticed that in the comparison, I guess I'll start with this. I noticed in the comparison that, you know, Leduc would be 1 stall per bedroom. Morinville's 1 stall per suite. Leduc County is 1 per ADU, you know, 1 per additional suite, 1 per bedroom. How did we decide to get to 1 per 75 square meters rather than a 1 per bedroom approach? I do know that when we undertook the LUB rewrite, we were taking a very proactive and new approach. I think it was. I don't remember how it was, but you know, ours was created in a way that others weren't, and others were looking towards Beaumont for some ideas on how to do that. But how did we get to the point where we decided it was 75 and not 45? You know, based upon a size of a bedroom or this or that. Maybe I'll start there.
Through the chair to Councillor Van Newkirk. I believe that when we were working with the consultant, that was some of the recommendations that they had come to based on their best practice research and their previous experience with High River and other types of land use bylaws that were similar. We used to have much more stringent regulations regarding secondary suite parking requirements, where we required, I believe it was an additional stall for every bedroom in that secondary suite. And we also didn't allow for tandem parking, I believe, at the time. And those were all changes that we had made based on, like I said, the best practice research that had been done, but also examining our subdivision development appeal board rulings where we hadn't had any challenges in relation to parking and there hadn't been those kind of complaints. So we felt that that would be a reasonable move. But I know that Ms. Sharp could talk a little bit more about this matter. When we did the jurisdictional scan on the parking, we did notice that, yes, we were on the more permissive side compared to pretty much everybody else in the region, but that the market is providing that 1 bedroom already. It seems to be, so they are over providing parking as it is on the permits, but I could let Yasmin speak to that if there was anything else to add.
There we go. I don't know which button is yours. I'll try that one. That worked. There you go. Ms. Sharp.
Yeah, not necessarily much to add, but I believe when we did a review of the 2022 permits, all development permits with an additional dwelling unit was providing an average of 4 to 6 stalls on site. And that was just with 1 additional dwelling unit. So there can be an adjustment to the land use bylaw regulations in terms of what our minimum requirements are. Likely it won't necessarily change what's actually being built. And I think the other number was the few, I believe there's 10 parcels within Beaumont that have 2 legal additional dwelling units on site. And those had an average of 3.5 stalls on the parcel. So essentially providing 1 per dwelling unit in the parcel. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll continue down the parking thread here. So is there a standard way in the planning world, or is it municipality by municipality how we count and allocate the number of parking stalls available on a property?
Who would like to answer that question? Ms. Raymond? Oh, sure.
So on-site parking typically is a hard surfaced stall. So that would be concrete or asphalt. All municipalities do tend to include the garage as parking as well, because it is built to accommodate a vehicle. And there are some jurisdictions you can see in the other comments that'll make explicit provisions about whether they can be in tandem or not. So stacked parking may only be counted as one in some jurisdictions, but in terms of what's a stall, it tends to be hard surfaced on the property, and garages count as well.
Gotcha. So is there an ability for Beaumont to redefine that for Beaumont? Like, could we decide to not count garages? Is there any reason we couldn't do that? There's reasons we may not want to, but is there any reasons we couldn't do that?
You could, through the chair, you could change the definition of what a parking stall is in the land use bylaw and say, you know, that it has to be an uncovered parking pad, for example. Yeah, you could play around with the definition. In terms of approving what a garage is, I mean, we've had comments that maybe a garage is no longer a garage, but in that case, an
Storage.
attached shed, and that's you have a definition of that. So yes, there is a mechanism to do it.
Ms. Raymond?
Outlier in the region. If we started to calculate parking that much differently than everybody else, this is a standard measurement that the garage includes typically 2 parking stalls at about, you know, their garages are getting smaller and smaller. It feels like they barely fit a truck anymore, but 22 by 22 or whatever is that standard, typically built for, a family that has a couple of cars. I think one of the issues that you find in Beaumont is when we have a high median income, we have lots of children in Beaumont, you've got that high disposable kind of income, you're finding that then you now have a situation where now you can afford to have a car for every member of your family that drives, right? And even if we no longer counted that garage as parking, I'm not sure that that would really solve, I think, the crux of the problem, which is that people don't use the garage. And that also people don't necessarily feel comfortable with that tandem parking situation. I think there are other ways that we need to be looking at how we're dealing with providing enough on-street parking in the face of lots getting smaller. When we've got street trees and utility boxes and fire hydrants and all this stuff we're trying to put into the roadway and still provide a place for somebody to park that's 1.5 meters from the fire hydrant, 1.5 meters from your driveway, and meeting all of the traffic safety acts, like that becomes more of a challenge, and then people just park poorly. So it's kind of like this perfect storm and clustering of a whole bunch of problems coming together that I think requires more active enforcement and, education components regarding that than maybe trying to, it might be more hard for us to have that as a definition, as an outlier within the region. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of why I said, could we rather than, should we? But the answer is that we could, if we chose to. We may be an outlier. And I think you bottled up the last comment really well in that, we're parking is a challenge, yet we're making lots skinnier and we still have trees and boxes and all of that to work around. Previously, I did explore what the impact of standardizing street widths were. And what I learned there was that that wouldn't make a huge impact to solve what's in front of us right now. It would be the linear roadway that you can park along is probably a more important thing to figure out than the width of the roadway, just because more square meters of paved means more square meters to plow and maintain and crack fill and all that. So I do get that. So I stood down there for sure. Doesn't mean I like it, but I stood down there for sure. When we talk about the levers that we have to pull as council to try and deal with some of the feedback that we've got, and I think you've captured, some of the reports that might be required to start diving into that feedback here. But the way I see it is we either limit the number of ADUs available on, and we get into a chart and decide how many can be allowed where in this piece of the discussion. And then the other lever we have to pull would be the square footage for parking triggers. And beyond that, I don't know that we have a lever to pull to try and appease some of the current concerns that we're hearing from neighbors, residents, and all the people in Beaumont. And, the crux of those concerns, which is why I put a notice of motion forward at the last council meeting, is because a whole bunch of that goes back to density, which exactly loops back to smaller lots, all the stuff that goes on the streets and where you need to park. So I think the last piece of this, I'll switch from parking triggers and just back into the number of ADUs existing in Beaumont. I really liked the maps that administration put together. They were very helpful for me to, quantify with the dots in the different, there was the big map and then the zoom in maps of the areas where we do have more ADUs and less ADUs. I thought those were very helpful. But how confident are we that we captured all the dots? I guess that'll be my first question. And then the second question beyond that is, what tools do we have to figure out where the dots do exist? Is that clear? Does that make sense?
Ms. Raymond, are you answering that, or Ms. Sharp? Okay.
So the data that we have that is the strongest goes back to, I'd say, 2012. So I'd say we're fairly confident that this captures vast majority of the dots from 2012 to present. And sorry, can you repeat the second question?
Yeah, it's just like, how confident are we in the number of dots is the first half. And then the second half is, how do we figure out where they are? Like what tools does the municipality have? But now, yes, on an application, right? But retroactively, how do we know that we've captured all of the ADUs in Beaumont? What tools exist to figure that out?
So first, it's a review of the approved development permit. So we can quantify how many legal additional dwelling units there are. In terms of illegal suites, that's a much harder thing to capture because they're often purposely hidden. We do sometimes come across them through advertisements on Facebook Marketplace, for example, for a rental suite. So you could comb through and maybe capture some of them. But again, it's hard to say if you have a family member in there that's renting and it was never advertised. That would be extremely challenging for us to quantify. So again, we're fairly confident that we have maybe 98% of legal additional dwelling units represented in this map. There was a few that were removed just because it was very obvious exactly which lot they were and for privacy reasons, but they were outliers. In terms of capturing illegal suites, that's, maybe there's a margin of an additional 2% out there that we could roughly estimate, but beyond getting any more exact than that would be challenging.
And then the last one, just on this one, what role does the assessor play into this? And the reason I ask is because there's been whole neighborhoods that have got mail outs, and it causes quite a stir come tax season because it says thou shalt fill out these questionnaires on your house, and you need to tell us the truth and all this stuff, and people don't want to do that. What role does the assessor and that assessment process play into finding out where suites exist? I know we're figuring out where the finished basements are one at a time begrudgingly, and where the fireplaces have been added and all that good stuff. But what are we doing? Like, what role does that assessor, that document and that process play in finding suites?
To the best of my knowledge, the relationship with the assessor is more of a one-way one. So when we have an approved development permit, we will pass that on to the assessor. But as far as I know, we don't receive the reports from the assessor back.
Mr. Hipkiss might want to, did you want to respond to that question? Oh, you did it again. Okay, there you go.
I can just help support you on that there, Yasmin. It is just the assessments are kind of a one-way approach from my understanding as well. There's not a direct value, kind of leading to some of the questions that were brought up before. There's no direct one-for-one dollar spent
on when property is improved relative to the assessment value. So it truly captures the revenue generated from an assessment as well, just so that, I guess, if you were concerned about that.
Yeah, less concerned about value and just trying to understand if the, the residential assessment questionnaires that are mailed out are a part of the, are a part of the process of finding where these suites are, right? That, that's kind of the crux of my question.
Yeah, so through the chair to Councillor Van Newkirk, those mailouts are used to determine the assessment value. They go to the assessor. They don't actually come back to the municipality in terms of what that content is. So we don't see what's gone on in that parcel. We're also not going out to physically assess the properties. That's how they are determining it, is through the self-reporting and through the permit data that they are receiving versus, the assessor knocking on your door or something like that. But no, we're not collecting information on what somebody's done that maybe they haven't reported on and then utilizing that for other reasons. So it's not a fact-finding mission for us.
Okay, yeah, I would say that the community thinks it is, so we might have some messaging to do around that come tax time. So I'll pause with my stream of questions
Michelle
for now.
would like to also
Oh, sure.
respond.
Yeah.
Sorry, just to continue the train of comments. The one other clarifying comment about what constitutes an additional dwelling unit, there's very specific requirements. So for example, you need that separate entrance, you need your own cooking facilities, all of that. But no permits are required for someone who rents multiple rooms out of their house. That would just be a different tenancy structure. So for example, there can be added density just through rental rooms on a house, but again, that wouldn't be captured in something like the additional dwelling unit map.
Ooh, that sounds like something we should put effort into capturing. Right, because if we're gaining ADUs in a house because they're renting out rooms, that should help us, like in our net numbers, right? So yeah, might be something worth actually spending some resource and time into, right? So yeah, I'll pause there for now.
Well, we'll come back to that another time.
Yeah,
Are
perhaps.
you finished with this round right now? I can go to Councillor McCook, who's been very patient.
Thank you. I was gonna go down the zero lot line path, but I can hold off if there are other people that want to speak to parking and whatnot.
Madam Chair, sorry, parking question. Well, we're on parking.
So it's okay to go to Mayor Dalek?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So just a quick question, if you don't mind. There's been some chat about zero lot lines and chatting about parking. So could you let me know if when we approve an area structure plan, subject that does have zero lot line homes within it, does the width of the road change at all? I don't believe it does, but I've seen some zero lot line in other cities. The roads seem to be noticeably narrower, and I don't think that's good for fire and protective services. I don't know if Beaumont's in the same position, please.
Through the chair to Mayor Daniluk, road widths are actually determined based on the classification of the road, not necessarily based on what type of housing product might be on that road. So for instance, you'll have wider roads on an arterial and they get more narrow as you get down into a local roadway, and then even probably more narrow if you were, say, in a condo development or something else where it's a private road and we're not needing to do the maintenance on that. But there would be that typical minimum standard that they would meet in the GDS based on that road type, the volume of traffic that they're expecting on that road, and that sort of thing, what the functionality of that road is. So they might get more narrow based on that, and then that might be examined based on the type of equipment that they had, that sort of thing as to why they might allow for, say, like a 14-meter wide roadway when somebody else won't go any smaller than a 17. That does vary by municipality by municipality. So yes, zero lot line might be smaller because in new greenfield areas, the tendency has been for roads to get smaller as we're more efficiently using land. So they are getting smaller in the newer areas.
Okay, so conceivably then, not to play the point too much, but basically what you said a moment ago, by having zero lot lines on, say, 1,000-foot strip of land that has houses on both sides, if you had 30-foot lots versus 40-foot lots, you'd have more cars, because if everyone has 2 cars in the same house, zero lot lines at 30 versus homes that are 40-foot lots, there's more zero lot line homes on that crescent. So there'll be more cars. Why would a zero lot line road be narrower, having more cars conceivably.
The narrowness of the roadway would shrink it so that it goes from curb to curb. It wouldn't necessarily change the dimensions from the driveway to the driveway, which is where we would be concerned with the parking. So you still have that same amount of cars.
Okay, I understand the parking on the property. I'm more concerned with the parking on the street.
No, but the parking on the street would be based on the driveway between each, right? So it's based on the linear versus the width of the road. The width of the road doesn't make a difference in terms of how much parking is available.
Right, as long as the width of the road is, okay, I know what you're saying, but just what I've seen in other municipalities, it concerns me that roads do seem to be narrower. But if we're not having that problem in Beaumont with 0 lot lines on the road width, I'm okay with that. I want to be sure our fire trucks can get in there. I've been to some places where I don't know how they get in there because there's just no room, but that's other municipality, that's their problem, not ours. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Cook, back to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So 0 lot lines are a hot topic in our community. I have a few comments and questions on them. First of all, I'll just bounce off of Mayor Daniluk. Fire and safety. So we've heard this is a concern. We've heard there's some narrow areas because there are likely more cars in a shorter linear spot. So I get the width, but linear wise. How does that impact our ability to respond? Chief Melvin.
Let's see which one you are. There you go. You're on.
Through the chair to Councillor McCook. Obviously, access to emergency vehicles, not only fire service, but ambulance and police vehicles is always going to be a concern. Trying to have the resources to constantly enforce parking and parking concerns in areas where there's bottlenecks into the community and areas where there's really one way in and one way out can create problem. It is a risk right now. We're managing what we can. I haven't officially been told of any risks where there's absolutely no way we can get in there. I would normally say we'll find a way to get in there, whatever the access is, but understanding that during the winter season, there's more snow on the road, so cars are parked a little farther away from the curbs than they would be in the summertime. Our municipal enforcement tries to identify areas where I don't think you're going to get a vehicle in here. But mostly the getting the vehicle in there, that's the easy part. Actually setting up and doing the operation, that can become challenging because a lot of time there's no room to move those vehicles out. So I think that's more of a broader, general assessment of the community in itself. But anytime a winter operations in any municipality, especially for fire service with the big vehicles, will be a challenge. And access is just one of many risks that we got to try to balance up by level to ensure they can get access in there. So.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I definitely see that as being an issue. And I think as I understand we are where we are in our current land use bylaw, but I think as we move forward and look to how we want to do things in the future, I think we really need to be taking some of this stuff into consideration, especially just with where our fire service is at and how we do need to increase our fire services. So if we're building areas that are a little bit more difficult to get into and out of, I think that definitely poses a problem. I just wanted to, there's a couple points in some of the reports we had. One of them was developments in regards to 0 lot lines. Developments are resilient and designed to respond to climate change, economic change, and changing demographic conditions. And then another part was under Cochrane, the social impact they had. They said the 0 lot line housing products have an opportunity to be developed at a cheaper cost due to decreased land costs, ultimately reducing the price of a single detached home and lowering the bar to home ownership for many families. I think initially, when I thought of 0 lot lines, I advocated for them for that aspect. I think now, probably because of increased costs to materials and stuff, we're just not seeing that. I think when you're looking at close to 500,000 for what is still a good size home, but you are dealing with a much smaller lot. We're not really touching on affordability at that point. So I think the social impact for zero lot line homes kind of goes out the window in that respect. Changing demographic conditions as well. And I know the developers said this is where the market trends are going, but I tend to question that. Is that where the market trends are going, or is that what is being offered? So therefore, that's just what people are buying. So I definitely think in regards to fire safety concerns, drainage concerns, how are we going to sort that out for homeowners? I think just throwing it back to homeowners and saying buyer beware is not fair in a community. They look to us to make sure that we're building products and we're allowing products in our community that are safe and that will be built to last. So if we know that there's drainage issues already, and then to some of the points in the survey, some of the folks that are currently live in them said they wouldn't buy one again. So I think that really spoke to me as well. So I just, my question back then is, what is the benefit of zero lot line homes if we're not getting large amount of density back for them? Perhaps, maybe do we look at other ways to increase our density through larger, higher density, as Ms. Raymond mentioned, rather than the zero lot line homes. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McCook. Very good points that you've raised there. Councillor Monkoff-Swain.
Yeah, I won't take the bait right now on zero lot lines because we don't have a motion on it, but I appreciate the comments going around. The one question I had, just to go back to ERMRB, so 35, that's the number that we've agreed on, but we're a member of EMRB, right? We have the ability to bring forward whatever we want. It may or may not get changed. But if Beaumont wanted to change that target for whatever reason, could you just explain the process for how we could potentially go to the ERMRB and lobby for a change in the density targets, given some of the challenges that we're facing regionally? If I need you to speak for that, please.
Ms. Raymond, are you?
Through the chair to Councillor Monkoff-Swain, I'll take the first little bit of this, and then I'm sure Mr. Wong will chime in here. They are updating their growth plan. There would be that opportunity to, I think, talk at the board level through the growth plan update, work that's being done in terms of density targets, and maybe the climate upon which they were approved in 2017 maybe doesn't exist today or has changed differently. Ultimately, we would need support from the other 12 EMRB members to be able to pass such a motion. We wouldn't be able to unilaterally do that. And so that would have to be a wholesome conversation in terms of, we're trying, what is the region trying to achieve? And when we're looking at, welcoming that next, 2 million people to the region or whatever that number is, that forces us to have to look at how we use land differently. And we are all responsible for doing that across the board. It can't be just one municipality doing that and the rest of us will continue to grow business as usual. That's not how the growth plan has been designed. The growth plan has been looking at all those things for efficiency, for climate, for urban agriculture, for minimizing our footprint, as it were, on the ground. So those are just a few characteristics that we would have to think about. And sure, if we wanted to get that, I don't think we would have support out there to do that, but it's something that's potential, and that would be the way to go through that. Joannis, if you have anything else, feel free to chime in.
So maybe I'll just quickly, sorry to stop you there. Sorry, my question was around what could we do, and I appreciate you took the opportunity to put in a plug for the process, and good on you. My question was just around what could we do? So you mentioned that the growth plan is coming up. Could you just explain when that is?
Sure. Right now, they're doing their 5-year growth plan update. with the board to update this. So they've been undergoing work in terms of reviewing population statistics, undertaking other work. Joannis and Matthew Grattan have been sitting on this work for the city of Beaumont from an administration perspective. So Joannis is in a better position to speak to this.
Mr. Wong.
Yes, the EMRB has started the 5-year review, as Ms. Raymond mentioned, and they are now currently working on the population forecast. And then to take to the next step and update some of the policies that went into the last plans, and also adjusting some policy directions for the future, the next 20, 30 years. So yeah, there will be opportunity for that discussion, but it will be like Ms. Raymond is saying, it has to be approved by the whole board. So the other 12 municipalities, or at least the majority of the members would have to agree with us on our proposal.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll make two comments. First, the growth plan talked about, the advantages of, getting the 35 for a reason. And I'll say regional transit was one of those things, but I won't go there. I will also say that, it feels like we're kind of nickeling and dime around trying to change things or cancel little things but ultimately the best way, if Beaumont wants to change the density targets, the best way would be to advocate at the ERMRB level. If we lose that fight, then we lose that fight, but we have an obligation to speak on behalf of our residents, and just to say, well, there's 12 people that'll probably vote no. I think that's something that this council, if that's what they're looking at doing, I would rather have that conversation. Personally, I'm a fan of the 35. I understand why it was put in. I know the challenges facing the region, but my advice to the rest of council here is, instead of trying to cut things around the edges, is if there is a density challenge in Beaumont that you're hearing from and that you support, I think that we should lobby at the broader policy level and not the, cancel one little thing here and cancel one little thing there, because it's gonna end up with the same number. So I'll leave it at that. I'm a fan of the process, the ERMRB. I'm glad I got the update around the growth plan. But that's where I would rather council spend its time on a more broader conversation than some of the smaller challenges. So I'll leave it there, but there's been a really, really good discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Monkhoff-Swain. Councilor Tessier, back to you.
Thank you, Chair, and great conversation so far. Thanks for the other councilors bringing up. Yeah, the EMRB, it's an interesting one, learning lots tonight for sure. I'm not against the 35 for sure. I think right now the subdivisions look organized and they look structured and look diversified and they look good. The one thing I don't like seeing is when we have a single family home, then a townhouse, then a single family home, then a duplex. That to me just personally looks weird, but meeting the targets, I still think we get nice subdivisions. That's why I kind of want to know where our targets are at and if they have to drastically change. Like I look at a land and in the whole subdivision, it looks like a City of Edmonton subdivision to me. And that worries me, because why would you come to Beaumont for the same size lot for less services, less area to run around, not enough emergency services, no transportation, right? We're a suburb. You come out here because you have more room to play, a nicer community, it's unique and it's family orientated. So I don't want to lose that uniqueness. So I'm not super worried about the 35, but what I am worried is if this new plan is coming forward, I have a feeling that they're going to ask to increase that number, or yes, increase that number per hectare. Can someone comment, is that the feeling or is that the ask for the upcoming 5-year plan?
Ms. Raymond?
Through the chair to Councillor Tessier, no, that's not the ask right now. They're still staying at that 35 dwelling units per net residential hectare. And I think when you look at what differentiates us from Edmonton or other municipalities, it's still that quality of life that we provide. There are still reasons that people move to Beaumont, and our new developing areas are very desirable. They're great places to live. They're still cost effective compared to other, I guess, Edmonton or other municipalities. we still have all those things in terms of trails, amenities. We have French immersion in our school. We've got lots of things for children. Like there's still that draw that I think we're not going to lose in terms of having those subdivisions that are built out that are like Edmonton or whichever. I think we're still going to have that Beaumont feel and that other stuff that we provide and those other things that we do that make us Beaumont, that are making us having that high percentage of growth. We're growing 4 times faster than the province of Alberta, and that's consistent. We've had a huge, rapid growth rate, which has led to immense pressures for the city, as you're aware, and things that we're grappling with. But that hasn't changed and that hasn't slowed down. We consistently are one of the fastest growing, highest housing starts, even in times when they're slow, because Beaumont is a desirable place to be, even as it changes a little bit.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. Mayor Daniluk, do you want to weigh in on this conversation?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, yes, as I said, on the EMRB representative for Beaumont, as all the mayors do, there's no information that I'm aware of any desire or coming down the pipe to change the current density target of 35, anything more deep than that. So to my knowledge, put that concern to rest as far as the density targets go, just to give you some more background. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And Councillor Van Newkirk.
Was Councillor Tessier done?
Sorry.
Was Councillor Tessier done then? That was your thought?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think we got to
Okay.
round 4.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, so just probably should have jumped in after Councillor Mokoff-Swain was talking, but literally the reason I put in the notice of motion I did, and thank council for the support at the last council meeting, was to try and see if there is a basis. So to get a baseline information on the density targets in our region and in the province and figure out on exemptions, because I figured if there was a discussion to be had around density, if we wished to start that discussion, we needed to start with, a baseline of facts, right? So, so that's why I put that motion forward. And I think when that report comes back, then we can have a look at it and see, okay, well, why is this region less, or how is it more, and why is it different, or why is it the same, right? Like the region that the regional look in the table that was able to come together was helpful for tonight for our region. But the second half of that motion, which isn't due for a while, and thank you for getting that table together quickly, is to look at Red Deer and Calgary and the other regions and see what pressures they're facing and understand how that works. So that's the first piece. The second piece around density and being desirable, I don't think that residents realize that in Beaumont we can't build a 4-season estates again. I don't think that residents realize that at all. The fact is we probably could, but it would have to be flanked by 3 massive apartments or something, to get the density targets together, right? So I don't know if that's the solution that folks would be looking for there either. So that doesn't really fit in the discussion anywhere, but it's just bringing to life one of those comments that was made right on the front end by Councillor Tessier. I don't think that that's the case, but what I do hope does come to fruition is a group of larger lots, and a group where we seem to be tailoring to high density, same size house, smaller lot. Everyone is tailoring to that, but there's a whole other side of the market that we're hearing from in Beaumont that doesn't want that. And that's why there's a feeding frenzy that happens in the real estate world, tempered right now by rates, when larger homes with bigger lots come together. If you've been buying a house in Beaumont, there's 5 of the smaller homes for sale at any time, and one larger goes and it's in multiple offers instantly. That's literally what our residents face, right? So I guess my question to administration is, how can we look to balance some larger lots and get some larger lots back into Beaumont? How can we do that? Because right now all the plans that come in front of us are skinnying up all the time. That's how I feel. If that isn't the case, show us where it's different. I recall, so that's my question. And then I recall a conversation that residents on Promenade Boulevard brought into the chamber. This was probably 2016 or 17. And the concern there is Promenade Boulevard was built and made for all the reasons that it was there. It was going up a hill. They have all the lights, they had wider lots, they had bigger homes that were able to go there. And then all of a sudden we were going to start a new neighborhood, and the lots that were this wide, I have to talk with my hands because I don't know the measurements, ended, and then lots that were this wide, like 2/3 the size, all of a sudden we're going to pop up there. And, the compromise that was made at that time was to shrink the lots incrementally. They used, 4 or 5 lots, whatever it was, to gradually shrink them down to get into the skinnier lots that the similarly sized homes are built on. It's not lost on me that we're still getting some good square footage out of the homes, but we're creating a lot of peaks. Anyhow, so that's I'm pontificating a bit there, but those are the kinds of things that make Beaumont, alongside, the list of everything else that administration put forward. So again, the question is, where are the larger lots? Who's proposing them? How can people get them? Where are they at? Because the conversations that I have around, folks are just seeing skinny lots everywhere and they're not desirable.
Yeah. I was calling you Councillor Raymond now. Ms. Raymond.
It's an upgrade. I
You're
think.
getting
I
lots
think
of
it's an
upgrade.
upgrade. All right. Well, thank you very much for that. Through the chair to Councillor Van Newkirk. So a few different things that you raised touch on. There are a wide variety of houses being provided within these area structure plans. Not all of them will be provided in every stage. So what you're seeing is just some of the neighborhoods are building out. They are getting more dense in some of those ones as they are building out as per, say, their outline plan. So Triumph is one of those ones where as time goes on, their outline plan says that they will increase their density as they move out towards Range Road 241. Another Four Seasons, you're right, could not be built in its current configuration without having higher density development that would be surrounding that. Four Seasons also has 1 access point only and not 2, right? So there are things that we wouldn't do again with terms of the design of that. There are some subdivisions where they are proposing it coming in, say with a 42-foot pocket, which is a larger estate type lot. They'll be in various different ones within developing areas such as Elon. I know that Larev is going to have larger estate lots, although some of their estate lots are still looking like a 0 lot line type product based on the desire and what I understand for the market in terms of, wanting to, the interest rates, they're maximizing how much house they can buy. And that's what people have prioritized over maybe the yard. And that's not the decision everybody's going to make, but there are options for people. In terms of Colonial, that one, that 17A that had come in, it was actually compliant underneath the higher, at the time it was underneath our old land use bylaw. They were called R1A and R1B lots. And so R1A was the larger one. Yes, they were designed originally to be the larger estate lots, but they had changed. The developer is still the original developer of the Colonial Estates neighborhood and has been since the 90s. They had made a decision to adjust kind of what they had been doing as they were, as what the market, it's what could sell. They designed their pockets towards what their production home builder would purchase for them. They still, the majority of those lots were still compliant underneath the larger sized one, but they were just considered to be R1B lots, so the smaller. And I would say that only a few of them were actually not compliant under that. But we did go back, work with the developer based on public feedback to have, I guess, the transition between the existing older stuff from, the 90s, I believe that's probably when it was, late 90s, into the newer stuff that was being built so that they were the same lot sizes. So there was about 3 or 4 lots, as you mentioned, that did transition, and then they moved into those. But as you can see, like, they still look quite large. It wasn't an issue necessarily with that. It was the style of home that people didn't want. They actually didn't want the Madame look. That was some of the comments that were raised at that time. They wanted it to be what the old stucco was and what the old building design will be. That was the issue there. They weren't they just didn't like that. You can see there's older R1B on Reichert that still have quite a bit of space in between those lots. They didn't actually maximize out the building pocket, which is something that we were seeing. There was a lot of like land inefficiencies, and then they were finding that people weren't paying for that, so they weren't actually getting their dollars. So there was a whole thing with marketability in terms of the lot sizes. And that's primarily who, if they had interest, we maintain a developer list upon our website. People can contact developers, say, I'm looking for this, and then they would know that that interest was there, right? And the developer is going to put out what they think that they can sell. They think that that market's there. They should contact the developer, and they would be looking at bringing that market in.
Thank you, Ms. Raymond. That's it. Could you put up the motions back on the screen again? I think we've had about an hour of conversation. I think it was a great conversation. I, for one, am really excited about the increasing diversity of our housing. So I haven't weighed in here against any of the current things that have been talked about and the direction we've been going in the past, but I certainly am open to hearing some of those concerns and what comes forward after this. So looking at that recommendation, we of course can't make a decision here to do anything. We can recommend to council as to where to go next. I mean, we can still do things, but we can't, you know what I mean? So is this something that as a member of the committee is willing to make this recommendation? Councillor Tessier, might you be one of those people?
Just a question, are we able to move up the timeline to end of February if that's possible before budget?
Ms. Raymond?
We could prepare the report previous, so that one could go with February. The whole thing would be April because the deliberations are going to take place March 22nd and 23rd. So we would have that in time for that deliberation to take place as part of that budget. So we could, the timeline is the end of April, but we would be able to get that done probably much earlier, depending on the scope of options you wanted us to consider, I guess would be that limiting factor.
Would you like to change it to end of March?
To the end of March, yeah, the earlier the better, like February for the report would be good. And then, yeah, I guess the parking study would be after, but I thought we chatted about a parking study and what is it going to tell us that we don't already know? I thought there was something already done in there about parking and walkable cities and stuff.
Ms. Sharp?
Yeah, so attachment 8, I believe, has a little bit of a description of what a residential parking study typically includes. So it's a review of current parking regulations and then the utilization of available on and off street parking areas. So that would be a vehicle count at various times and days of the week and tally of parking supply, and then recommendations to match regulations with observed demand. So essentially, we've heard from residents that there's a perception that there's not enough parking on site, and this would just validate that perception and match up, you know, how many cars are moving in the area, what stalls are being used, and at what frequency, what times of day. So it's more of a data-driven and then context-specific to Beaumont understanding of how parking typically functions in our residential neighborhood, just to guide our discussion in terms of what regulations would actually meet the demands that we're seeing.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to get into it too much, but I got a lot on parking here. Like obviously under the existing one, it's anyway. I would rather see the study done in the winter personally, because of the windrows and the width of the roads and access. Is that going to be part of the parking study? Like what I know it's looking at exact vehicles and where they're parked, but are they looking at, like, is this street wide enough to accommodate vehicles on both sides?
One, I think we can define the scope for the consultant. So if we want specifically it to be looking at in the winter, then we could put that as part of what we're looking for as the developer. So we can, or sorry, as the person who's defining the scope of what we want them to look at. And we can define the conditions that we want them to look at, what times of day. They'll have their recommendations, but we can also place those parameters as well.
Councillor
Okay.
Tessier, are you prepared to make the motion or are you just asking questions about it at this point?
More or less questions for now. Like personally, I don't think I'm gonna get much out of the parking study that other communities are already using, right? And for our minimums, I'm just worried that, we gathered already the huge land use report and review. We know we need to increase our parking restrictions. I don't think a study's gonna tell me any differently. So I'm kind of maybe doing a temperature check on council instead of getting administration to do the extra work. Are we going to actually use that data to change our minds a little bit?
Okay, so you're not prepared to make that motion, at least number 2. The first part you were,
The first part's a little too open to me. I kind of got to know what's in it. That's my only worry. Like if you look at their original motion, like the 4 things in the motion, it's saying it's going to capture noise control, parking, and what's in the engagement. So for me, I'm just, sorry, but not limited to. But the only worry I have is we put this report forward, it came back with a ton of review. Are we just doing the same thing that we just did?
Ms. Pajaya, would you be able to lend some clarity to this process?
I think so. So what I'm hearing from Councillor Tessier is that he would like to do the first portion, but add some more specifics about the types of options that the committee would like to hear about or to recommend to council. And I think from planning and development's perspective, having a better sense of the type of options that would be of interest would be helpful so that they would have a better sense of what that timeline could realistically look like. So this proposal was just a starting point. I think if the committee could be a little more specific about the types of options, that would be helpful for administration as well as for the committee.
Okay, I'm going to go to Councillor Van Newkirk right now and see what you'd like to add to this.
Yeah, thank you. Just referring back to that attachment 8 there and what's in a parking, residential parking study. I think one of the things that we've talked about and we've heard from administration that isn't included in here would be a bullet point on the impact of enforcement on parking. I think that if we went and did enforcement at a higher rate, then perhaps we might free up the streets a little bit. And what does that mean to parking? Because that would, if people were getting tickets for parking in places they're not supposed to, then that means they gotta park on their hard serviced lots. They gotta park on their driveways. They gotta park in their garages, right? So, for me, if we're going to do a parking study, we can't do it and not include a look at the impact of increased enforcement for, illegal parking in the community. So I would feel strongly that would need to be added to the parking study. I do have concerns similar to Councillor Tessier that we have a pretty good idea of what the parking problems are in Beaumont already. So why do we need to study it more?
Study the
Right?
problems, we need the solutions.
Yeah, like I'm in solution mode here. So
I hear you.
I do have those concerns.
Yeah, good points. Councillor Monkoff, oh, sorry, Ms. Raymond first, and then I'll come back to you, Lisa.
Sorry, thank you. I just have one comment. We provided a report based on the feasibility and options to consider. But I hear that council has a desire to make amendments or for us to look at different things. What would be helpful for us as we're preparing that be to understand what are we trying to solve? So what are the problems? Because we can provide a different range of options for you to consider as the solution. But I think really what we need to know is what do you actually want us to solve? So what issues are we trying to actually get to when we're saying parking is a challenge or we don't like zero lot line? When we're looking at some of these different things, or we want to limit the amount of dwelling units, what's the issue? And then we can provide you with those options. But there's lots of different ways of looking at them versus, so we're just trying to understand that. If we could get that, then we could provide you with how long that would take and what that scope would be.
Okay, Councillor Van Newkirk or Councillor McGuff-Swain, I should go back to you.
No, I personally don't have too many concerns, so I'd like to hear from these guys to give them the direction so they can bring us back something. But I do agree that no need for a study.
We need to
Um,
solve the problem.
Yes, but to their point, we're going to give them clear direction on what we want them to bring back.
Thank you for that. Councillor Van Newkirk.
Yeah, for sure. And just to respond to the, what problem are we trying to solve? Definitely around the parking. We're creating tighter neighborhoods and we're forcing situations where people are, well, we're not forcing, we're creating situations that provide an opportunity for people to park where they shouldn't park. So unless we're going to get our higher, how many would we need? 52? Summer students and 750 gallons of yellow paint and 1,400 paintbrushes. We can go old school and start painting yellow lines, right? That's what we used to do in communities, right? It's like get the measuring tape out, paint it yellow, right? I don't think we should do that, but that's what used to happen. And I may be dating myself, but if you couldn't park there, the curb was painted yellow, right? So if we got the yellow paintbrush out in some of these communities, where could people actually park, right? In the more dense communities, a problem that I would like to see solved is how do we handle parking on the streets that is limited? That's the one thing. The next problem that I would like to see solved would be, I don't know how we would do it. How do we encourage people to park on their property and use their garages? How do we encourage that? What do we do, right? We're in a situation now where as a municipality, there's one instance and, it's not fair to swipe a brush with one instance, but here we go. We're approving home-based businesses in garages. Be it a gym or an auto detailing, those are the two that pop to mind. That is not the norm. I know it's not the norm and I know it's not prolific, but if we're amenable to approving additional uses for garages other than parking, do we need to not do that? I don't know what the solutions are. This is why I'm looking for some support for administration, right? Is how do we encourage people to use their garages, park on their parking pads, and come off the streets? And then I'll step back for a moment just because my mic is on and reflect on summertime in developing and building out neighborhoods where concrete pumpers get jammed up all the time. They're trying to be in and out of those neighborhoods before everybody comes home. So concrete pumpers the same size as our fire trucks. So I'll just leave that there.
Thank you very much. Mayor Daniluk.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I do believe at our last committee of the whole, we had a discussion around additional dwelling units. I'm wondering if those words could be added to the motion, or is that already incorporated, Ms. Raymond, you think, in the scope of the report on options for mitigating concerns?
Did you get that, Ms. Bajay? No. Could you repeat it, please, Mayor?
No problem. I believe we had a discussion at the previous committee of the whole before we delayed to this evening, and we ran out of time. We talked about additional dwelling units as being a concern, mitigated. So about mitigating concerns, I thought one concern we had was the additional dwelling units. If I'm wrong, correct me, but I thought that was one of our topics we talked about. Yes, Ms. Raymond, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Ms. Raymond?
I was going to ask if the issue was regarding the number of dwelling units that existed on a parcel. Yes. So
That's
I
my
think Ms.
recollection.
Boucher got that. So thank
That's my
you.
recollection of the conversation. Yes, thank you.
Councillor Tessier, I'm hoping I'm pressing the right button there. No, I turned it off again. There you go. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. At this point, Sandy, we can just add what I've kind of sent to you and see what the others think, but I would like the things I've added in the report to see what what it looks like. I think it'd be a good idea to actually get that data. It might take a little while here.
I'm sorry.
I'm just going to add about 5 things to this motion.
Ms. Bajay?
Do we need
I might need a recess just because there's some overlap between some of the things that have already been suggested and some of the things that I believe Councillor Tessier would like to put forward, just so that I could perhaps get a clean draft of a potential motion. Could we take a 5-minute recess?
You certainly
please?
could. I think that's a good idea. So we'll have a 5-minute. We'll be back at 6:39. Thank you. 5 minutes? I said 39.